I welcome all of you to this webinar on current laboratory updates on Gastromet of Metropolis. I hope and trust that you and your near and dear ones are safe during this unprecedented time. Metropolis is the largest laboratory chain in India, having 40 years of outstanding experience in laboratory service, performing more than 4,000 tests with NABL or CAP accreditations, with state-of-the-art facilities, with branches in India, South Asia, Africa, and Middle East. We have nearly 120 labs of about 2,000 patient service centers and nearly 10,000 collection points. Gastromet is a specialized division of Metropolis that works towards diagnosis of diseases related to gastroenterology and hepatology. Gastromet offers comprehensive panel for rapid detection of diseases using advanced technology for accurate reporting for correct diagnosis. These reports go to many doctors, specialty doctors of gastroenterology all over India and abroad. So Gastromet is consists of diagnostic tests, includes tumor markers, viral hepatitis profiles, including immunity profile, mutation profile, viral load, genotyping, drug resistance, PCR sequencing, autoimmune hepatitis, Wilson's, celiac diseases, IBD, liver fibrosis, and so on. To speak on these updates, we have with us this evening an eminent microbiologist having more than 10 years of experience in diagnostic, clinical microbiology, and molecular biology, and of course in the infectious diseases. Dr. Niranjan Patil, presently the head of microbiology and molecular biology at Metropolis Global Reference Laboratory and Global Super Specialty Hospital at Mumbai. So Dr. Niranjan Patil, after his MBBS, took his post-graduation in microbiology from GMC Aurangabad. He holds IDCC certification in infectious diseases and has attended various training programs, includes national trainings at NIRRH ICMR Institute and JIPMER Pondicherry. He is also trained in medical virology from Hopkins Institute, also trained in Hinduja Hospital in association with Henry Ford Health System, Detroit, USA. He is trained in research methodology and has published in British medical journals. Currently is designated as head of microbiology, molecular biology, and COVID-19 lab at Global Reference Laboratory, Metropolis Healthcare Limited, and Global Super Specialty Global Hospital. In addition to this, he is having the additional responsibility as infection control and biosafety officer, and Gastromet, he being the member of National Task Force on Gastrointestinal Diseases. He is the nodal officer for ICMR in Maharashtra and task force member Mumbai Municipal Corporation for COVID-19. Maharashtra Medical Council accredited speaker for CMEs and conferences, has many publications and are indexed in international journals. He is a member of Hospital Infection Society and core committee member of Society of Clinical Microbiologists. When the pandemic started, everyone was hesitant to come out. Dr. Niranjan fearlessly volunteered to tackle the situation in March, April 2020. Being the head of microbiology and molecular biology testing laboratory, fully capable of carrying out thousands of COVID testing samples, taking high risk. So let us hear Dr. Niranjan for current laboratory updates at Gastromet. Welcome, Dr. Niranjan, and welcome once again all of you to this webinar. Dr. Niranjan, you can go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the kind introduction. It really gives me a pleasure, to speak on this forum. All the people who are attending this are much more qualified than I am, and probably they have seen much more cases than I have. But this is my attempt just to, share our experiences and share what all things we can offer to help them achieve the diagnosis and help in the patient management algorithms. That is what is today's endeavor actually. Ideally, we will be discussing each and every topic in details in the individual CMEs as well. We'll be talking on each of these various aspects of the gastromet specialty, whether infectious or non-infectious. With this, I begin my today's presentation. Yes. So, as I said, it will be a refresher, and there'll be a few recent advances that I'll be speaking on. So I'll give some introduction to the gastromet. What is gastromet? The different refresher topics, important recent advances which are happening in the present situation, and then we'll have a question and answer session. So just to speak about what is gastromet. So gastromet is a specialty division of Metropolis that works towards diagnosis of gastroenterology and hepatology. It is an admixture of uniquely available tests with experienced pathologists, microbiologists, and a tenacious effort to cater to the gastroenterologist, so as to make patient algorithms, management algorithms much better. We offer, as sir has already spoken, we offer a comprehensive range of services with respect to rapid detection of disease, whether infectious or non-infectious. So what all diseases are covered? As you can see, diseases like hepatitis, autoimmune liver disease, Wilson's disease, celiac disease, inflammatory bowel disease, food allergy, number of other tests that we provide. We also provide hepatitis B, hepatitis C, drug resistance, drug monitoring, and so on and so forth. So as I said, this is a combination of infectious disease, biochemistry, and histopathology. Always it is a team effort. We believe in that. So now let us have some refresher on IBD. I know, it is like your day-to-day bread and butter, but then still, just a refresher. So as we say, what do you see may not be the reality, right? So because of the overlapping symptoms, whether it's rectal bleeding, fatigue, joint, or whether this is like chronic diarrhea, abdominal pain, cramps, and constipation. These are like overlapping features of IBD and IBS. Some point towards IBD, some point towards IBS. Hence, the diagnosis of IBD and IBS can be challenging. I would like to have the video, please.
The current COVID-19 pandemic has required a complete change in the management of IBD patients who need to undergo endoscopic procedures. Endoscopic procedures, being an aerosol generating, pose a risk of transmission of COVID-19. Endoscopy units in India are performing fewer than 10% of their usual volumes due to the current restrictions. As per the latest Indian survey conducted amongst endoscopists about endoscopy practice during the pandemic, 59.6% endoscopists said continue all the emergency procedures but stop all the elective ones. 26.5% said that high-risk elective procedures should be discontinued, but low-risk and emergency procedures should be continued. 12.3% believe that all the procedures should be continued as before, with proper precaution and PPE. Only 1.6% believed that all kinds of endoscopic procedures should be stopped. Since resources to follow current international guidelines, including use of negative pressure rooms and PPE, are limited, most of the international societies like SFED, French Society of Digestive Endoscopy, from their Italian and French experience, recommended that during COVID-19 pandemic, fecal calprotectin tests, together with remote monitoring of symptoms and patient-reported outcomes, could be a safe alternative to monitor patients and could have a key role in avoiding endoscopy or cross-sectional imaging when these procedures are not urgent or necessary. Gastromet from Metropolis. offers fecal calprotectin test, which is simple, reliable, non-invasive and stable marker used to distinguish between IBD, Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, and IBS, to determine disease's activity and risk of relapse in IBD. To monitor IBD treatment response, FC test offers 93% sensitivity and 96% specificity.
Thank you so much. I'll reshare my screen. So as we just saw in the video, in the present challenging times of COVID, how a non-invasive test, a simple test like a fecal calprotectin is actually helping us differentiate or IBD from the IBS. Patients less than, as we can see the diagnostic algorithm here, patient who are less than 45 years of age with change in the bowel habits for more than 1 month, we measure their tissue transglutaminase, IgA levels, fecal calprotectin, TSH. If the tissue transglutaminase, IgA is positive, then we are probably suspecting a celiac disease. However, if the tissue transglutaminase, IgA, fecal calprotectin, TSH are all normal, and the calprotectin levels, then if we do calprotectin levels, if the levels are less than 50, we suspect as irritable bowel syndrome, whereas if it is more than 50 micrograms, then we suspect IBD and investigate further to confirm. Another further test we can perform are ANCA IG and ASCA IgG and IgA to confirm the inflammatory bowel disorders. So fecal calprotectin, as we say, it is actually a very potent indicator of inflammation. It helps us to differentiate, as we have just seen in the video. It has got a very high sensitivity of up to 98%. Specificity is less, but then yes, one can always, it can always help us to reduce the unnecessary endoscopies and patient discomfort. Patients are very comfortable when you are having a non-invasive test versus something going inside their bodies, so that is something, a very convenient test to help us differentiate and monitor the patient. ANCA test, as we are well aware, it is positive in ulcerative colitis, and it's just seen barely in 10% of Crohn's disease cases. Hence, useful in differentiating between the two forms of IBD. Similarly, anti-Saccharomyces cerevisiae antibodies, which is ASCA, IgG, and IgA, is ASCA are predominant in Crohn's disease. 70% of the cases it is seen compared to an ulcerative colitis. ASCA, IgG, and IgA levels also help us to differentiate Crohn's disease from ulcerative colitis. The same thing that I wanted to emphasize. Now, see if this is a table which speaks about the sensitivity and the specificity of p-ANCA, ASCA plus IgA and IgG antibodies. As you can see, this is quite self-explanatory, and how it helps us in differentiating between the ulcerative colitis and the Crohn's disease. As we can very clearly see here, that the specificity of p-ANCA is very high in ulcerative colitis, whereas the specificity of the ASCA is very high in case of Crohn's disease. Now, just obviously, one can also perform antibodies to goblet cells. Antibodies, ulcerative colitis has been associated with a defective colonic mucous layer, and there's a reduced number of goblet cells that are seen. So one can actually see that the specificity of this is very high, up to 98% specificity is there, and can actually help us differentiate, the Crohn's and the ulcerative colitis. Similarly, and antibodies to pancreatic cells, autoantibodies against exocrine pancreas cells were found predominantly, or rather almost exclusively, in Crohn's disease patients, and thus helps in differentiating us from Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. DNA-bound lactoferrin is also one of the useful tests which we can consider to help us differentiate between the Crohn's disease and the ulcerative colitis. So it is very simple. Depending upon the levels of fecal calprotectin, we can differentiate between the suspected IBS or a suspect IBD. So we have already discussed in the video. I'll just run through this. We offer all these possible tests. Now, just to speak something on the recent advances, Phil Murray BioFire gastrointestinal panel. Now, what is this? This is nothing but a multiplex PCR whereby 22 different targets they're identified in one test, and just takes barely 2 hours to give all this. Now, what are the different pathogens which are covered in this panel? And we have found this very, very useful, where the patients are infected. Like for example, somebody is as a hospital admitted patient, and you want to differentiate between Clostridium difficile and the other whether it is other bacterial causes or parasitic causes. We have seen, in fact, patients who are positive for bacteria and parasite, or virus and parasite. We had few cases where there was a norovirus outbreak, and we could identify, because we had this Phil Murray BioFire, we can actually identify, because norovirus, as we are all aware, is highly infectious and can be an important cause of outbreaks. Like for example, which happens in case of a commercial what we call as the cruise liner, commercial cruise liner, or a hospital outbreak. It can also be an important cause. We have also seen cases of astrovirus, on the similar lines. It actually helps us, especially in cases for difficult to grow organisms or difficult to identify, like Yersinia enterocolitis. We have also seen it be quite useful in cases of Clostridium difficile. We have seen a lot of value in using this test, because, for example, people who are transplant recipients, or who have who are prolonged ICU admitted, in those situations, this test, because the results are available within just 2 hours, it really helps us. And because you get the toxin A or toxin B, and that is why it is very useful. And even the recent guidelines, they suggest that a PCR based test or molecular test helps us to differentiate or helps us to early identification or early diagnosis of a Clostridium difficile or an antibiotic associated diarrhea or a dysentery. So the sensitivity of this is 98.5%, and it was a very high specificity up to 99.2%. We have really found this very, very useful. A word or two, medical refresher on food intolerance. Food intolerance, food allergy and food intolerance is something which we are finding that is, because there's a lot of awareness. Also, there is a lot of, people are more aware about what they want to eat, what they are consuming. They are very calorie and nutrition conscious these days. And obviously, people are experiencing symptoms. So how do we differentiate between the food allergy and the food intolerance? So, as we speak, so this is a comprehensive testing that we offer for food intolerance, whether it is dairy products, whether it is seafood, whether it's fruits, cereals, or whether it is spices or non-vegetarian items, or your day-to-day vegetables and miscellaneous. So we can actually identify 221 food parameters in one go. So what is this? What happens with food tolerance? As we are aware, the patients can have the symptoms, like patients can have hives, or patient can have rather abdominal bloating, non-specific pain. Patient can have lethargy, headache, or migraine-like features. So these are the common, symptoms that patients generally present. And how do you differentiate between a food allergy and a food intolerance? So we have to understand that food allergy is actually if you will see, it is an IgE dependent, and hence it is a immediate response. So it is when I compare this with a food intolerance is IgG dependent, and as we say, it is a kind of a type 3 reaction, which is like a delayed hypersensitivity kind of a reaction. And so the response in case of food allergy is immediate. The signs and symptoms are immediate, whereas in case of food tolerance, they take time and they develop gradually over hours to days. In case of food allergy, the spectrum is wide, and it can be as mild as like a irritation in the mouth or the ear canal, or they can have redness or a rash, or particularly especially in the mouth, they can have something like sometimes they can have angioedema, they can have symptoms of indigestion, and they can present with features like of persistent nausea or vomiting. In such situations, the diagnosis is offered clinical for food allergy, and specific allergy testing can be performed, where we look for the IgE and then we look for the particular food item, so that we can actually eliminate that food item. Whereas in case of food intolerance, because this is IgG mediated, the symptoms are generally mild and they are non-life threatening, and diagnosis obviously by clinical findings, and also one can keep a food diary, and we can have tests, the test that we offer at our place, which is basically a protein microarray based test, where 220 more than 220 food items, the food proteins, they can be tested. What happens is, in case of a food intolerance, so this whenever the food is getting digested, some undigested protein or some part of the protein, the antibodies, the immune response happens to the offending food agent, and then the body's immunity is not able to actually handle it properly, and then they start getting deposited in the various parts of the body or various organs of the body, and then we start having particular symptoms. So now there are simple remedies to it, where you can actually, depending upon what zone it lies. So whenever we are talking about food allergy testing, so we have to understand that there is when the results come, so the foods can lie in the normal range, they can lie in the elevated range, or they can lie in the borderline range. So food which lie in the elevated range are ideally to be avoided completely, at least for a span of 3 months, following which they can be reintroduced by giving a food trial. Whereas those patients who are having borderline food intolerance, so then they can be consumed in rotation and maybe in reduced quantity. So these are the foods which actually we may switch, can get switched into the elevated category if they are consumed frequently, as the immune system is giving warning, against these food items. So one has to also remember that some persons can show these foods, foods in the elevated category, which may be either their favorite foods, or they may be one which constitutes the major portion of their regular meals. In such scenario, it may be difficult for the person to skip and avoid all those foods. To help in such situations, the person can try and avoid the most severe, like top 5 problematic foods from the list, and try to rotate the others from the list along with the ones in the borderline category. This will help the person to get rid of the majority of the symptoms and simultaneously help reduce the adverse immune responses against those that are consumed on the rotational basis. So generally we give the values in terms of interaction unit per ml, and they are categorized whether green, yellow and red, whether they are normal, borderline or elevated. Something more of the recent ages is the recent advances in the GI tuberculosis. Pyrosequencing, or rather I will say next generation sequencing, it not only helps us to identify TB at a very faster rate, but also can help with the patient management, because we are able to give 17 different anti-TB drugs at one go, so that by the time the phenotypic drug sensitivity is available, you have preliminary findings and actually start the treatment without having to wait. So as you can see, here there are 17 different anti-TB agents are covered, especially those which are going to be helpful in case of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, extremely drug resistant tuberculosis, and pre-XDR as we call them. So MDR, pre-XDR and XDR tuberculosis, they can be covered. And those agents like bedaquiline, delamanid or protamanid, all these are also covered, in addition to the usual first line and second line anti-TB agents. So what happens, with the TB next generation sequencing, the liquid culture generally that is performed, it takes 21 days. So you get the results as susceptible or resistant. Whereas when you're using a TB NGS, there's a reduction in the turnaround time. The results are faster and reliable. So one can perform it from the culture tube or culture flat tube, or from the sample as such, and perform a DNA extraction subjected to the whole genome sequencing, get the DNA, and we can report the 18 or 17 drugs at one go. So we are also able to, as I said, recently introduced drugs are also covered in this, whether bedaquiline, linezolid, pitonilamide, delaminid, gadifloxacin. So obviously it gives, the results are reproducible, they're accurate, and it covers all possible relevant drug-resistant mutations. Also, whenever there is a controversy with respect to the gene expert findings or with respect to the Lyme proboscis findings, TB-NGS can actually give us a good answer, and it can also help us, in conjunction with other modalities to identify the newer novel markers for resistance. So we are offering this test at Metropolis. So this is something which we are really excited about, as this is a WHO and RNDCP accredited test, and this is going to definitely, already it has come in the WHO algorithms. Revised National Tuberculosis Control Program is also actually incorporating this in the part of the molecular testing algorithm for TB diagnosis. So we are really excited about this offering that we are giving. Future offerings definitely on the next generation sequencing. When I'm talking about H. pylori, is one of the important things that the gastroenterologists they deal with, where your histology, the rapid urease test, H. pylori culture. At times this H. pylori culture can be difficult. The drug resistance testing for H. pylori can be difficult. So here the utility of next generation sequencing definitely merits attention, and we can definitely consider including this for the drug susceptibility for H. pylori, which is very, very important, especially in cases of either relapse or patients who are resistant to treatment and to the usual agents. Let us talk something about the current topic about gastrointestinal mucormycosis and how it is affecting. Yes, we all know that it is the less common form of mucormycosis when compared to rhino-orbital-cerebral mucormycosis or pulmonary mucormycosis. But yes, it can happen. The route of infection is ingestion. The common sites which are affected are the stomach, the colon, the ileum, and the duodenum. Symptoms are generally non-specific abdominal pain. There is a distension, nausea, vomiting, and at times gastrointestinal bleeding. In fact, this is the most common form of mucormycosis among the neonates, and is really challenging in case of neonates because of the commonly occurring scenario, which is resembling gastrointestinal mucormycosis, which is your necrotizing enterocolitis. So obviously, how do you diagnose? So as we can see the picture on the extreme left hand side, this is a lactophenol cotton blue mount of the mucormycosis. As you can see, the sporangia 4, and the arrangement of this can help us differentiate between the 5 different species of the mucormycosis, which are Rhizopus, Rhizomucor, Mucor, Absidia, or now called Lichtemia, and Cunninghamella species. The one on the top middle portion is the calcofluor white fluorescent stain, where we can actually see the fluorescent fungal elements or the fungal hyphae on this. The extreme right hand side top corner is the KOH mount. The advantage of the above 3 methods is that it is available in 4 to 6 hours maximum. So this is something very advantageous. Whereas what we are seeing on the bottom left hand side is the HN. These are the HNE pictures, where you can actually see the broad-based ribbon-like hyphae. And on the extreme right-hand side, you can see the silver-based special stains which are employed in case of histopathology for the mucormycosis. So what do we offer? So ideally speaking, we offer, as I said, fungal stains on the endoscopy, biopsy materials, which is the calcofluor white stain along with the KOH, and fungal culture and also susceptibility. It is very important to identify up to species level. I would just like to emphasize the importance of the species level because of the difference in the susceptibility. For example, Aspergillus, Aspergillus is is susceptible to voriconazole, but mucormycosis is not susceptible to voriconazole, and we may have to start with amphotericin B and also the other antifungal agents we may have to consider. So it's very important to have the accurate diagnosis about the mucormycosis. Also, histopathology is, although it is very sensitive, but species level identification cannot happen on histopathology because there are various features, various fungal infections which can mimic the hyphae which are seen in case of histopathology stains. We have developed something called as a panfungal PCR along with the DNA sequencing, where we can do it directly from the tissue specimens and also on the culture isolates, where it not only covers the all the Aspergillus species, all the Mucor species, but also the Candida species and other pathogenic fungi. So here we are able to cover more than 150 species on the panfungal PCR. We are also offering species-specific real-time PCR like mucormycosis, like the Mucor PCR or the Aspergillus PCR or the Candida PCR. Apart from this, obviously the fungal blood culture is something which we really look up to, because in the present times, Candida is in fact one of the most leading causes of invasive fungal infection, and widespread use of the antibiotics, especially in case the hospitalized patients, and the mucosal breach is one of the important causes of Candida coming into the blood circulation and causing invasive fungal infections. Same thing happens with the Aspergillus or Mucor, which can happen as a breakthrough infections when the people are giving actually broad spectrum antifungal agents and the steroids, especially in COVID situation, which leads to derangement in the blood glucose levels, and the other underlying features also make it comorbidities, make it the infection of the fungi in such patients. Now we also have to remember that COVID itself is a situation where there is a depletion in the cell-mediated immunity, especially the lymphocyte, the way they respond to such invading pathogens, and that is why we see such difficult to treat patients. Now, other fungal biomarkers are 1,3-beta-D-glucan, which can done from the serum. It can help us predict whether the patient is going to have Candida or Aspergillus, fungal infections. Whereas 1,3-beta-D-glucan on two successive occasions, if it is negative, we can safely rule out cryptococcosis, or we can safely rule out mucormycosis. So that is the importance of doing 1,3-beta-D-glucan in advance, as a biomarker, as a fungal biomarker. Galactomannan specifically useful for Aspergillus, and again to rule out the mucormycosis. So just to give us a diagnostic algorithm where how we can divide whether it is a tissue sample or whether it is depending whether it's a blood sample or any other sterile body fluid, we can actually divide into 3 portions. First portion will go for the fungal culture and KOH and calcofluoride stain, whereas the second portion again in the sterile container will go for a panfungal PCR, and the third part in the formalin for the histopathology stains. Blood can go into fungal blood culture bottle, and the other blood sample or the serum sample we can use for the galactomannan or 1,3-beta-D-glucan or the Cryptococcus antigen detection. We have seen in fact cases of patients who are HIV positive, who are COVID-19 positive, who had also cryptococcosis, disseminated cryptococcosis. So that is also we have seen very recently. This was just 2 days back that we have seen. Also, I cannot overemphasize the importance of having the correct specimen, so that we can give a accurate kind of diagnosis. Fungal sensitivity is something which I wanted to emphasize, fungal culture and sensitivity, so that you can de-escalate the antibiotic regimens later on. Patients who are although they were discharged from the hospital without a significant course, they need to be followed up on a weekly basis. They may be required to be followed at the weekly basis with the ENT surgeon or the primary physician, especially if they were diabetic or had any of the comorbid factors, or they were treated with the immunomodulators during the course of their regimen. So these are the various hepatitis profiles that we offer individually for hepatitis A, hepatitis, whether it is the antibody IgM or IgG, or HIV RNA PCR. Obviously, hepatitis B, we cover everything from the serology, including HBV DNA PCR, HBV viral loads, and HBV drug resistance as well. It is very important, to have knowledge about the drug resistance in the present situation, because it helps us to cater the treatment accordingly. So this is something which we are providing, and this is a very sophisticated test where we actually perform the sequencing, or the rather genotyping for cases of hepatitis B virus. Again, emphasizing the HBV genotype and drug resistance testing. This is useful in predicting the response to the therapy. Obviously, HBV genotype, I cannot overemphasize the importance of this. Apart from this, HBV pre-core mutations, where we also, we perform this test as well. So basically, comprehensive test for HBV, right from serology to immunity profile to the mutations to the monitoring and drug resistance. We provide all the necessary support to the diagnostic for the diagnostic purposes to the treating clinicians. Same way for hepatitis C, a battery of tests which are designed in such a way so that the combination of tests can be offered, whether IgM test or total antibodies or antibody reflex to HCV RNA, again HCV genotyping, which is very important, and other tests like HCV viral load. This we do on the specialized platform, Cobas, TaqMan assays, which are considered one of the better ways of performing HBV and HCV testings. Hepatitis D, again HCV RNA PCR and HCV total antibodies, especially in case of fulminant chronic hepatitis, especially in cases where it is indicated. I cannot overemphasize the importance of hepatitis E, especially in cases of pregnant ladies, where one can encounter such situations. Now, autoimmune hepatitis panel also we are offering at our place. The various parameters depending upon the relevant autoimmune autoimmune component that is involved. We offer a variety of tests, and these are included in our panels. Wilson's disease, similarly, we offer the complete or a comprehensive package for the Wilson's disease, whether it's cellular plasmin levels or whether it is a copper levels, and testing for Wilson disease ATP 7B gene, which is actually involved, which undergoes mutation. So this is something which we can do the Wilson's disease, for the Wilson's disease. Celiac disease, again, celiac is an important where we offer a lot of profiles which cover the endomysial antibodies, tissue transglutaminase, anti-gliadin antibodies, IgA, and also we do HLA typing, because as it is known that HLA-DQ and HLA-DQ8 are associated with the celiac disease. So this is something which we are offering at our place, genotypic level as well. Similarly, with IBD and fecal calprotectin, I think I have covered, so I will not repeat this. Liver fibrosis panel, obviously, something which is important, where we actually, can perform the Fibromax and the Fibrometer test for liver fibrosis, something which we are offering. Similarly, individual GI tract infections, whether it is whether it is a Giardia infection. So this Giardia we do by special staining of the stools or by Giardia antigen. Similarly, for E. histolytica, we perform trichome stain. We perform the GI film array biofire panels, which can cover Giardia, Entamoeba histolytica, and other opportunistic infection, along with the virus panel, which I've already covered. Typhoid, everything for the typhoid. We have seen a lot of cases where extraintestinal manifestations of the typhoid in the form of abscesses, whether they happen in the bone, in the skeletal system, which we are actually seeing a lot more these days. We are also seeing a lot of patients who are carrier of typhoid, who are eliminating typhoid through the urines as well. So gastrointestinal panel, I just wanted to emphasize that by using that panel, we are able to actually give within the same day by the film array biofire. H. pylori, as I'm saying, H. pylori, we are offering antigen detection, culture, and the various antibodies, but at the same time, our plan is to offer the next generation sequencing, where we may also offer the drug resistance for Helicobacter pylori. Pancreatic elastase is also something which we offer. Occult blood and the other routine tests, for the liver function that we offer. So with this, I would like to take question and answers. I know that today's topic if I have to go individually into detail, it is a CME in itself, where I can have cases, data, and publications, to support and to have an in-depth discussion on individual topics.
Thank you, Dr. Niranjan, and you have covered most of the investigations with respect to the gastroenterology. You have covered how to distinguish IBD from IBS, then how and what is the importance of fecal calprotectin, and also you told about ASCA, the importance of ASCA, IgG, and IgA in distinguishing IBS from IBD. Then also you told about the importance of BioFire. It detects 22 targets. Very interesting. Then you told about the food intolerance with respect to different food particles, the intolerance, IgG intolerance, and of course it is different from the allergy. And once you eliminate the intolerance food from the intake, you can avoid the disease. Then you told about the gastrointestinal tuberculosis and its importance of NGS in detecting the different drug resistance. Then about the H. pylori culture, and also distinction of the NGS for detecting the H. pylori. Then also you told about the mucormycosis and gastrointestinal mucormycosis, and the importance of beta-D glucose and the galactomannan. These tests are now asked by the clinicians. Then you said about the hepatitis markers, especially hepatitis B, infection, drug resistance, mutants, all that. It's a good thing. Then you said about the autoimmune diseases, autoimmune liver diseases, panels, and all. It's all interesting, and you have well covered. And so the viewers may have a few questions. I think already there are a few questions. Let me. Yes, can you share your experience and insights on GI and COVID, and what follow-up would you recommend? This is a one question.
Sure. So actually, if you'll see, so whether when you're talking about the GI and the COVID, so initially we played out a video on how the difference, there is a lot of difference in opinion about how do we practice in the present times, whether we should go for the emergency procedure. So we saw that more than 59% of the gastroenterologists, they believe that yes, if it is an emergency procedure, it has to be done. Whereas there were up to 23% of the gastroenterologists who believe that certain procedures they can be postponed, or a non-invasive procedures or a low-risk procedures they can be considered in the present COVID situation. So that is the role of this fecal calprotectin, where we can actually monitor and screen patients and avoid unnecessary, or we can probably postpone some elective endoscopy. So that is one thing which we can definitely consider. What we have seen with the present pandemic is that there have been cases where people who are on immunomodulators, and how patients who are on immunomodulators, and how this gastrointestinal mucormycosis is actually playing and havoc, and maybe it can present especially where it may be difficult for diagnosis because the symptoms may be non-specific to begin with, and in spite of the best of the therapy for COVID, they may be missed. So that is something which we have to think. At the same time, there has been a lot of uptake of the fungal biomarkers, because these are the fungal biomarkers which can actually predict whether somebody is going to have a candida infection. Because as I said, people who are on antibiotics, especially in the hospital settings, or people who are on total parenteral nutrition, and in such situation, what happens is that their normal intestinal flora is suppressed, and there's a lot of mucosal freeze that happens, and that is how the candida, especially Candida auris, it comes into the bloodstream and causes drug-resistant form of fungal infections, which is actually, as we are speaking this, 50% 50% of the people who are having secondary infection, whether fungal infection or bacterial infection in COVID, they succumb. So this is also seen, if you have seen today's Times of India, they are also speaking on the same thing, that the secondary infections, they can do more harm. So we have to actually take care of them along with proper management to the underlying comorbid condition, whether it's diabetes or, a transplant or any other comorbid, illness. So that has been there. There has been a lot of uptake with respect to the newer modalities. When I'm talking about newer modalities, I'm talking about, say, PCR, whether it's a pan-fungal PCR for fungal infections. There's a lot of been curiosity. There has a lot of been requests. We are getting a lot of requests for pan-fungal PCR because it covers Candida, Aspergillus, and everything under the sun, and Mucor. At the same time, we are also getting specific requests for Mucor PCR. So that is also happening. Gastrointestinal infections. I just wanted to emphasize something, that people who are in the ICU settings, we are seeing that, because they are on antibiotics. So invariably, we are seeing that Clostridium difficile infection is also increasing, and it may be at times may not be diagnosed, but when we are using a rapid test like a FILMARRAY BioFire, you can actually identify that the symptoms that a patient is presently, which is overlapping with the COVID, because whether it's loose motions or whether this is altered stools. So whether it is because of Clostridium difficile, which we can pick up early and salvage the patient early and start the patient on appropriate antibiotics. That is something, which is very, very important. Having good antimicrobial stewardship, having good antifungal stewardship is very important. That is what I believe. And obviously, the way the practice has changed or evolved, I can say. And we are going to see that more and more newer tests are going to be ordered.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Niranjan. And there is another one question. Mucormycosis, you have black fungus, yellow fungus, and white fungus now.
Yes.
Already you told about the black fungus you can identify. Is there any chance to identify yellow fungus? There is a question from the audience.
Sir, thank you for this question. I'm very happy to take this question. The reason for this is that these fungal infections actually, by next weekend, maybe we'll run out of the spectrum of the rainbow, because black is covered, yellow is covered, the white is covered. Maybe in a day or two we'll have a red fungus, or maybe we'll have a green fungus. So, let us not name fungus by the colors. Rather, let us have a proper species identification. Okay, so why it is important to have a proper species identification? Because, as I said, when we are labeling somebody as white fungus, so are we dealing with a case of Candida auris? Because Candida auris is a resistant kind of Candida. It is not like your Candida albicans. It is a resistant kind of Candida, and it has potential to be to spread in the hospital settings from one patient to other. And obviously, in patients who have received broad spectrum antibiotics, who have a breach in the the mucosal immunity, so there is something which we have to look into. We know for sure how can we diagnose this. So we can diagnose using site-specific samples, whether it is the biopsy specimens or the washings or the scrapings, or one can go for like example, one can go for the fungal cultures, which in case of Mucor, as we said, because they are fast-growing fungus, so we can easily identify in a day or two. They are very, very fast-growing. In fact, the Mucor is very fast-growing. We can easily identify. Calcofluoride stain is something which I want to focus, or KOS stain, simple stain. You can get the identification at least a screening level in 4 to 6 hours. So that is something which which we have seen is being very, very useful. Same way with PCR, because PCR also we are able to give release the results in 8 hours as soon as the sample reaches us. So we can actually identify why it is important, because having species identification, because the treatment management for Aspergillus is different from Mucor, and it is different for the other fungus, so like for example Fusarium, which are one of the common fungi apart from the Candida auris. So it is very important to identify these various fungi rather than identifying the basis what the media is saying, yellow, white, or black. Because actually, if I say black fungus, Mucor is not the black fungus. This is a misnomer. Black fungi are those fungi which have actually melanin in their cell walls. Mucor does not have melanin. In fact, the black fungus, the name comes because of the clinical manifestation, where the tissue is necrosed, the tissue becomes black because there is a angio invasion and the blood supply distal to that angio invasion, there is the necrosis of the tissue. The blood supply is restricted, and that is why you get the black or the necrosis, and that is why the black fungus. So again, I would rather not go on the colors, rather identify the species, give the antifungal sensitivity, and help you with the patient management.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Niranjan. Again, the continuation of the same question. Black fungus is not contagious, but is this the same case for yellow fungus?
So yes, again the same thing, sir. They do not transmit from one patient to other. It is not airborne as what we are saying with COVID. It is not airborne. Generally, it is mostly the endogenous factors which actually predispose the patients. And when I'm talking about say mucor, so the spores of the mucors are ubiquitous. They are everywhere. Whether they are in the hospital air, in the ventilation system, if it is not properly cleaned. We have seen cases in the liver ICUs where actually the source of infection was the AC duct. When we saw the AC duct, actually we could see the fungus growing there. We took the swabs. We were able to identify the source of the infection, and it was and we were actually able to service. We also seen situations where unsterile water is being used, and it can serve as a source of infection, especially in COVID positive patients who are diabetic and who are giving immunomodulators or steroids where the glucose function is deranged.
Yeah, one question from my side. See,
Yes.
when we do this antibody test,
Yes, sir.
sometimes we find it very difficult to clearly distinguish because it may be in the borderline.
Yes, sir.
So in that case, we may not be able to give a correct report.
Right.
So in such case, what is your opinion whether to do the test again or after some time we have to see it?
Yes. So in case of India, sir, I believe you're asking for 1,3 beta D glucan indeterminate results, right?
Yeah, indeterminate or borderline cases. Yes.
Yes. So in such, so what happens? You have to also identify what are the limitations of those fungal biomarkers. So one of the limitations is that this 1,3 beta D glucan is actually a component of the cell wall of the fungus, and it is also seen that patients who are on beta-lactam inhibitors like piperacillin tazobactam, in these patients who are having beta-lactam inhibitors, these are false elevations are seen. Okay, and especially in a tertiary setup, it is possible that a patient may already have received that particular antibiotic or was exposed to that antibiotic, and that is why it may be giving indeterminate results. In such situation, it is very important to use the bacteria of the other test and also repeat that test. You can repeat that test and you can actually see whether the levels are increasing or whether the levels are decreasing. So that can actually give us an idea. For example, in mucor, the black fungus that we are talking about, the levels of 1,3 the glucan are actually normal or negative. Whereas if it is a candida infection, it will increase. Similarly with aspergillus, that these levels will increase, and they can predict. See, what is the role of this test? This is to predict whether the person can have this in the next coming 7 to 10 days, or if the patient can develop this infection in next 3 to 5 days, or if the patient is already developed, are the levels reducing with the proper antifungal treatment. So that is a role. If in case of indeterminate results, we may have to repeat the test. We may have to use adjunctive test like a fungal blood culture, or maybe we may have to look at what antibiotics we are prescribing to the patients. Accordingly, we can then interpret the results. It is very important not to treat the reports, but to treat the patient in totality. Where you look at the various aspects, the epidemiologic settings which the patient is in, and what are the pre-test probability of having a candida or having a mucor or other infection.
Yes. So thank you, Dr. Niranjan. I think one more last question from my side.
Yes, sir.
See, now, the PCR was supposed to be the higher end test till last year.
Yes.
And, now the COVID made PCR very simple now. And,
yes.
So many centers started doing
yes.
the PCR test.
Yes, sir.
I hope for this infectious diseases, mostly
yes,
all in future PCR tests may come forward, including the
Yes.
multiplex PCR. In
Yes.
one test, we can distinguish so many organisms together,
Yes.
and one need not wait for the culture reports and all. Is it? What is your opinion on this?
Yes, actually, sir, like as I'm saying, so this film array testing where we are actually able to report 22 different pathogens, whether bacteria, fungus, virus, so it is something which is actually changed the way the diagnosis is happening. We are able to identify, sir, at times, those infections which we are not at the back of our mind to begin with, because this is a syndromic approach. So the microbiology was actually always syndromic, but with the advent of this multiplex PCR, it has become much more syndromic, where we can actually see whether we are dealing with a virus or a combination of a virus and a parasite, like for example, a rotavirus along with the Giardia or rotavirus along with a Campylobacter or rotavirus along with Clostridium difficile. So because the symptoms are similar, the spectrum is similar. It is we have found a lot of use of this, especially in cases of, I will say rather, patients who are having transplant. We have found this very, very useful, very, very useful. Where like patients who have gone a kidney transplant, and there the immunosuppression is very, very crucial. A bit more of immunosuppression, and you can actually find that they can come across infections, and this by doing this test, it saves the time. Although the tests are costly, yes, the tests are costly, but if a patient continues to stay in the hospital and go by the conventional test, or a patient continues to stay in the ICU, the billing of this patient is much more compared to this test, where you get the objective evidence, and we can de-escalate the unnecessary antibiotic or antifungal treatment, or any other treatment, and we can actually manage the patient much well, and discharge the patient early with lesser complications.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Niranjan. I think there are no more questions. You presented very well, and I think one more question. Yes.
Yes, sir.
One more last question.
Yes.
Let me. Yeah, talking about transplant, do you have any combined panels for liver transplant patients, something like that? Liver transplant?
Yes, sir. For liver transplant patients, yes, definitely. We are having those infectious parameters where where we help the customizing also. Like for example, a particular setup, like if a particular institute wants a customization for their pre-transplant screening, we can do it. In fact, with our association with the transplant hospitals, previously what we have seen, that we have also helped them with this fecal transplant, or fecal microbiota transplant, where we had actually helped them customize the investigations. We helped them with the fecal microbiota transplant, and with the possibility of using this multiplex kind of test, with the possibility of having next generation sequencing, we can definitely offer such customized panels for liver transplant patients, and we do have such panels as well. Yes.
Okay, I think there are no more questions. Thank you, Dr. Niranjan, for your presentation on GastroMed and various tests connected with GastroMed. And thank you, viewers, for being with us. Thank you once again, and thank you, Metropolis and the medical marketing team, Ashita and Dr. Niranjan. Thank you.